You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody. Just before the music this week, I wanted to recognise a tragedy that took place on the trail a few days ago. God knows, we have enough to be upset about in this world, but the Appalachian Trail community was hit by a disaster of its own this week. A young man, trail name Grandmaster, was sitting at the edge of the cliffs at McAfee Knob this past weekend. He wasn't right at the edge, he wasn't fooling about, wasn't drunk or stoned, as some people have cruelly suggested. He was just chilling, having his breakfast, living the dream. Apparently he simply passed out and fell over the edge about 100 feet below. Emergency services got to him, but he soon passed away. This just shouldn't happen, but it did. I don't know the young man, I'd never heard of him, but I feel the loss of him as a brother. He was following his dream, and if we can take some comfort, he was doing what he wanted when he died. This reaches all of us, and I didn't want to get on with the show without mentioning Grandmaster. Rest in peace, brother.
Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Welcome back to the podcast. This is Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis, and I'm your host, Steve Adams, or Mighty Blue. Today's guest on our 325th show is Dennis Pack, or Bookworm. Another vintage hiker, much like myself. Dennis completed his flip-flop through hike last year, and I found him to be full of wisdom about his hike. He also introduced me to a cause I'd never heard of, but I'll let him tell you about that. Also today, our rapidly diminishing Mighty Blue class of 2022. This week, we have a young lady who's still heading north, while another young lady is back home. They'll be on after Dennis. Finally today, and I know that a lot of you are enjoying this book by George Stephanos, Then the Hail Came has reached Fontana Village. So let's get on. Here's Dennis Pack, or Bookworm. Our guest today is another of my generation of hikers. Well, actually, he's younger than me. He turned 60 on the trail when he completed the AT last year. This is Dennis Pack, or Bookworm. Hey, Dennis, how are you?
Hey, Steve.
Now, your wife told you that you were being silly by saying you didn't have a story to share, and you've got so much of a story that I've got more questions than I normally have. So we'll just we'll see how that goes. And I know from reading several of your posts in trail journals this morning that hiking the AT absolutely wasn't on your radar at all a few years ago. Tell us how it became an option, and in many ways a bit of an obsession for you once you decided you wanted to do it.
So I knew about the AT. I heard about it, just sort of knew about it, I guess.
Sure.
I had no idea there was a culture, or I didn't know people through hiked. I didn't know they hiked the entire thing. And a couple of years ago, 2019, I went to a local music festival and I ran into a friend of mine who I hadn't seen in quite a while.
Sure.
And actually, I believe you spoke to him. His trail name was Monk.
I did.
You didn't interview him, but
I wanted to. He was resistant to come on the trail. I'm definitely going to get back into him, and you can tell him it's okay.
He's on the. He's a whole nother story. He's quite a character, but he's traveling the country, living out of his car, essentially.
Nice.
Another adventure. But anyways, he told me, I was like, hey, how you doing? Where you been? And he said, I just finished hiking the Appalachian Trail, and I just kind of looked at him like I had no questions because I had no idea what he was talking about.
Pete, don't you find people do that to you a lot these days as well? Because they just don't get it, do they?
I just was kind of like, what? Okay. And then I think it was at night I went home and I was curious. So I did what anybody does when they're curious. I Googled it.
Sure.
And I started looking up and I'm like, oh, that is so cool. And I don't know. It's like I hate to use the term, but it's kind of like a virus. It just took over me and I couldn't stop thinking about what a cool thing it was.
What made it cool as far as you're concerned?
So yeah, I thought about this even after I got off the trail. trying to figure out why the hell I did this. And
I did that a lot as well. Yeah.
my background, I had never backpacked before. Mm-hmm. I had only just gone for short little hikes and stuff. I wouldn't even call them day hikes. But every year I would get together with friends, and two other friends, and we would go on a week-long canoe trip.
Nice.
In Algonquin Park in Canada, and that involved portaging and et cetera. And it was some elements of backpacking, mostly carrying the pack in the canoe.
Sure.
So,
yes, I bet. Yeah.
But being out in the wilderness, I just loved it. I looked forward to it every year. And I grew up car camping basically with my family and that as a kid. So when he told me he had done this, and then I started to understand what it was, it just seemed like the idea of being out in the wilderness for a long period of time, just trying to do that, the challenge of hiking that distance, it just seemed like an epic journey that might be worth looking into.
It's definitely an epic journey. It's not so much wilderness as I originally imagined. When they call it 100-mile wilderness, they call it that for a reason, because it's about the only bit of wilderness there is. And even then, you can get off every day if you wanted to. And in your journal, because I read some of it this morning, you spoke about the relationships. Once you made the commitment to go, you spoke about the relationships you've missed, your wife and your kids and so on. But also the lessons you wanted your kids and your grandkids to learn. What were you trying to pass on to them?
I want them to see that you can do big things, that you can, a lot of people, my wife included, looked at this and thought, I would never want to do that. She still tells me that. I'd never want to do that.
Yeah, sure.
But part of the lesson is that just because it looks like it's impossible doesn't mean it is. And challenging yourself, just stepping outside your comfort zone, that's a huge part of it. Of course, for me it was, and I think it is for most through hikers.
Yeah, I'm sure you're right. Yeah, I'm sure
you don't go into it with that. A lot of people don't go into it with much experience.
Yeah. Well, tell me about it. Like you, I'd done none of this either. It was quite remarkable. But the reason I raised that particular thing that you wrote it before you'd set even foot on the trail. So that was a pretty ballsy statement to make straight away. This, you wanted to teach them something you could do, because you might not have been able to do it. So when you committed to do it, did you have any doubts in your mind as to whether you'd be able to do it?
Oh yeah, big time.
All right.
Actually, I went through a process. I think it was maybe a week after I had talked to Monk, and I said, I think I'd like to try this. And my wife, she saw me like glowing, like something had happened to me, and she didn't want to say no. So I was just so enthused by it, and I did what everybody does. I did a lot of YouTube.
The YouTube rabbit hole, yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah. I read several books, etc. And then after a couple of weeks, I was like, I don't think I can do this. This is like, I started to realize it was a big physical challenge.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
Was your wife trying to put you off at all?
No, not at all. She never did.
And had she actually said no, would you have gone with that or not? I'm not asking you to. Sorry, this is not a fair question to ask. But if she didn't ever say no, that's fair enough, isn't it? But did you want to do it so much that you thought it was important for you to do?
Yes, that's what I came to. That I was afraid. I was a little afraid of it.
Yeah.
I was afraid of what it might be physically, and also being away from home for, I assumed it would be 5 or 6 months. It turned out to be closer to 7. But
yeah, that is tough. I think people who think of doing this have got to take that into account. The fact it's a great adventure. You are leaving somebody at home to cope with life, your part of life, and as well as their own part of life. So you really put the onus on other people when you actually leave your family for that period of time. And when you were down that YouTube rabbit hole researching gear, what were your gear takeaways from that? Were there a number of things that you thought to yourself, that makes sense, I need to do this or I need to do that?
Yeah, I didn't have any gear. I mean, I had a backpack that weighed probably 5 pounds. And,
yes. Actually, my first hike, I took one that weighed 5.5 pounds, but shows you what I knew. Yeah. So what did you learn then?
So the YouTube, well, I learned from both the YouTube videos and from Monk. Monk became my mentor, and he's a ultralight packer. So he carried something that looked like a book bag, and I was like, I don't know, that just seemed extreme for me. It seemed like I might be leaving too many things behind that I might need. But I watched Evans on the trail, I think his name was.
Evan
Evans.
Backpacker, Evan Backpacker,
Really, he's also ultralight, but I took away a lot of what kind of tents might work. And
yes, because I noticed on your journey you talked about you got in touch with some of the lightweight gear companies as well, or you worked out that was the sort of stuff you needed. When you got your gear together, was it adequate for the job for you? Or did you try to go quite lightweight, or did you just pack other stuff as well? I
actually finished the trail with pretty much what I started with.
All right.
I think I actually ended up doing a pretty good job. I ended up getting 2 tents because first I bought the Big Agnes tent,
right.
A double wall tent.
Sure.
And then the Gossamer Gear tent went on sale, and of course it was on sale, so I had to buy it.
So you actually had 2 tents before you left?
I did, and
Impressive.
I ended up using both of them. The Gossamer Gear is a little lighter because it doesn't. Right. Well, it's a lot lighter actually because it uses the tracking poles.
And I know that you did a shakedown. You did several shakedown hikes, in fact, and you did a shakedown in the Allegheny National Forest. And your friend Dave, is that Monk?
Yes.
Okay, so you went with Dave. That must have been really important for you because he must have been able to teach you stuff on that. I know you learned stuff yourself by doing it. What did he teach you? What were your takeaways from that your very first shakedown hike?
I think Dave really emphasized that I could have confidence in myself, he felt that I had the personality traits, I guess you would say, to overcome anything.
Right.
The reason his trail name is Monk is because he used to be a Zen practitioner.
Yeah.
So he was deep into meditation and that.
Sure.
And I also meditate and I met him through mutual meditation groups and that. I wasn't Zen, but I still do other meditation. And I found that, and he just emphasized, you practice meditation, you have the ability to just be with what is,
Suck it up. Suck it up, buttercup.
Exactly.
It's kind of like that. And you also did a shakedown in the Adirondacks, and that was more for the physicality because and that also was with Dave, wasn't it? And that must have been very tough because he told me, you said in your journal, he told me that the whites in New Hampshire and the mountains of southern Maine were very challenging, but no part of the AT was as challenging and difficult as the hike we just accomplished. How bad was it?
It was rough because it's not marked very well, for one thing, and there's a lot of almost vertical climbing. There was bogs. It was kind of like going through the presidentials in kind of in a day. Like it was condensed almost.
Oh my gosh!
And plus on top of that, it was raining a lot the day we went up, and it's very deep wilderness. That part of the Adirondacks is kind of remote from the rest of the Adirondacks.
Right.
And I will say, though, he told me that. He said, you could do this. This is nothing like, or this is much more difficult than anything I endured in the
really?
Whites.
Wow.
And my opinion now after that is it's not quite true that some of the Whites were.
Yeah. Yes, I know. They're a bit of a shock to the system. I don't care how strong you think you are. When you get to the Whites, it just smacks you in the face, and it really does.
It did, yeah. Some of it scared me. And, I was keeping the journal as I went. I ended up journaling almost every day, as you could see, just trying to keep up with things that happened to me.
You had quite an interesting little, not spreadsheet, but a little graph sort of thing, which indicated the days or the miles you'd done each day. And you actually got into some quite good-sized miles quite early on, didn't you? Was that because you were with people or you just felt comfortable because you'd prepared so well with your mileage? I was with people the entire time. I went from one trail family, so to speak, to another. I think I hiked alone for like a couple of hours or something. And was that deliberate?
Not really.
Because you struck me, and you said you like solitude and you like the wilderness and so on. So you didn't get any solitude at all on the Appalachian Trail.
No, I wouldn't say. I hiked alone during the day, but I always had people that I was meeting up with, at each stop. I would see them periodically through the day, and then we considered ourselves to be hiking together, even though, of course, I would walk for hours during the day by myself, and they were way behind or usually way ahead of me or so.
And that is lovely, isn't it? Don't you think? The fact that you've got, it's not so much someone to come home to, as it were, but it feels like, you are moving your home up the trail, aren't you, really? And your family and the people surrounding you are coming with you up the trail. And that's kind of an encouraging thing that you're going to meet somebody in 5 miles time at a shelter, isn't it?
Well, so a couple of days before I made my way to Harper's Ferry, where I started my hike, I saw a post in the Appalachian Flip Floppers 2021 group of a woman who said, "I'm starting on April 19th. I think that's my start date." It was the same day in Harper's Ferry, and I was like, "Oh, that's cool." And I think I responded, "I'll see you on the trail," or something or whatever. Well, I saw her at the first shelter because for some reason I just decided to take a little break, And I think the trail works like that. It's almost magical. Like, there was no particular reason for me to stop at that shelter, but I did. And I walked up, and there was a couple of people there, and there was this woman. I talked to her, and I'm like, "Oh, you're the one who posted on Facebook." So that night we camped. I don't remember the name of the campground. We camped at the same spot, and we started hiking together right away. And I used to tell her that one of the reasons I was hiking with her is because she had more common sense than I did. and I
always surround yourself with people who know more than you.
We learned a lot together, but she was really good at figuring things out that I wasn't necessarily that good at. Just along, planning for the next day. And I felt like that's kind of how the whole thing went for me. It was always nice to be with people who maybe had some of the skills that you need that I didn't necessarily have, or just ricocheting ideas off of each other,
But I think you find that everybody around you has a valuable information or a valuable take on every part of life, because you're all sitting around in the shelter. You're all talking to each other. Nobody ever feels left out in a shelter life, do they? And I actually, this is jumping ahead to one of the questions I was going to ask. And this is one of the best things. In fact, it's my favourite thing that I read this morning. I read your journal for about an hour. My favourite thing that you wrote is, planning is important, but plans are useless. That is exactly how I feel. To explain to people why you think that is, and you're right, by the way. Tell us why plans are useless.
Because the weather changes, circumstances change. Things happen. You plan to go to a particular shelter, and then something happens that interferes with that. I always found it was good to we planned out, like, especially when I went southbound with Soundscape. Yeah. Soundscape, who you interviewed a few episodes ago, was he was the planner. And I loved it.
Sure. No shit.
But we had to constantly adjust our plan. He would come up he came up with a 6-week plan on getting to Springer on around November 13th. And it worked.
Cool.
But you talked about that because how I started. I was supposed to start in Georgia. I had planned on over a year. I had planned on starting in Georgia.
Yes.
In end of March, and then I was going on my little hikes around. Around here, there's some undeveloped parks, and I slipped in mud and sprained my wrist like really bad. Like I could barely use my hand, and that was just. I think it was like 2 weeks before I was supposed to leave.
Oh. And how did you feel when you knew you couldn't go? Then did you think of not going, or did you start immediately having another plan in place?
No, I maybe gave a second thought to it. I might have thought about it for a second, not going, or I thought, well, I could postpone until next year. And then I was like, I can't do that. I have to go. I need to go. I'm so prepared. And plus I had quit my job.
There is that,
that I had for 10 years.
But funny enough, to a degree, you did quite a few shakedown hikes, didn't you? Was it 3 or 4? I can't quite.
I would say.
And other walking around, yeah. Perhaps you'd over prepared, and so falling over, that was a result of doing too many shakedown hikes. So you decided to flip flop, but before you headed out, and this was a big decision for you to head out on the trail. I know that, about leaving family and so on, but you decided to link it with a purpose. Now, I'd never heard of this at all. And when you started explaining it to me, you got a bit technical on me, and I didn't really understand it even then either. So give me the idiot's guide to what Lewy body dementia is and what it means to you.
Well, there's everybody's heard of Alzheimer's, of course.
Yeah.
But there's other forms of dementia, and they're all related somewhat. But Lewy body is actually the second most common form of dementia.
You said Robin Williams had it, didn't he?
Yes, and they discovered that after he died, after he committed suicide.
And how does it manifest itself then?
So I describe it as being like a combination of Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's. There's the mental deterioration,
sure,
and there's a physical deterioration, I guess would be a way to describe it.
Sure.
A loss of the ability to walk, and trouble thinking, concentrating.
Sure.
And in addition, I don't think Alzheimer's has all the same symptoms. People have will have vivid nightmares,
right,
and hallucinations. I believe they kind of know that they're hallucinations, but that's very disturbing to have to live with.
Absolutely, yeah.
And of course, it's a progressive disease in that sense.
And this happened to somebody in your family,
right? So I had never heard of it until my cousin Tim, who's 6-7 years older than me, called me one day, and there was we have a family picnic that comes up every year. And he called me beforehand because he lives out in Rochester, which is about an hour and a half from where I live. I live just outside of Buffalo, New York. And my sisters live not too far from me. And so he called me and said, I want you to tell, your sisters and everybody that I had been diagnosed with Lewy body dementia.
Right.
And if they're going to notice that he's using a cane, that he stutters when he talks, he's forgetting words, and those symptoms were coming up, and didn't want people to be shocked, because we don't see each other that often. Hadn't seen him.
That's very thoughtful of him to say that. Yeah.
But when he told me that, I was upset. He didn't describe it very much to me. He just kind of told me a little bit about what was going on. And I got off the phone and I asked my wife about it because she's a nurse, and she, then I started to understand more of what he was up against. And it's awful. He and I didn't exactly grow up together, but because we would see each other a couple of times a year, but we always had a connection.
Family, yeah.
Good connection. We're similar in a lot of ways.
I think your connection was over books, because this is why you're Bookworm, because you were pretty much into books. So you use the hike as an opportunity to help raise money for research into it, or support of the people who have Lewy body. So did that go? People read your journal. Would they contribute towards the fund?
A lot of people did. Yeah,
That's cool.
read. I mentioned it. I would talk about it in the journal. I think I wrote one journal where I tried to describe it pretty well. And every time I would make 100-mile milestone, I would do like hikers do, make the little $100 or 100 in stone or twigs or whatever.
Nice, yeah.
And then I would post my journal. And
so you're the nuisance who does that all the time. Yeah. Sorry.
And when I posted in my journal, I would say I walked another 100 miles, or I walked 500 miles for Lewy body dementia.
That's very cool. Yeah, it wasn't you weren't pushing it down people's throats, but you're letting people know, which is a really cool thing. Now, so you headed up to Harper's Ferry. By the way, starting in April, you could have finished northbound if you'd wanted to, but you decided to go Harper's Ferry. And because you had such a great adventure, you really enjoyed yourself on the trip. You probably don't regret the broken wrist then, do you?
No, I think that's where I was kind of going. There's like a serendipity or something on the trail.
Yeah.
I wasn't even on the trail yet, and it was already teaching me lessons.
Right.
I had planned and planned for this trip, and then at the last minute,
plans useless.
So where that came from is I went to Harper's Ferry, and of course I flew to Washington, so I had to buy fuel when I got there. So I went to the little store and supply store in Harper's Ferry and bought the fuel.
Sure.
And for some reason, I told the guy at the counter that, and he said, and that quote is actually from Eisenhower when he was a general, General Eisenhower.
All right,
that
cool.
said that about, it's good to have plans, or however, I can't remember. You said it better, I think. But
plans useless. Yeah. So you started, and with the amount of shakedowns you'd done, you were pretty well prepared, as you say, and physically, and I guess mentally, because you discussed with Monk and you meditate and so on. Was the real thing very different, especially after to be on there for 5 days, 7 days, 10 days, you start getting into the routine of being on the trail. Was it very different to how you'd imagined it to be, or was it as you'd imagined it to be?
I describe it as being somewhat what I expected, but way more. In every aspect, it was way more. Physically, when I went down to the Allegheny Mountains, I went there because they're about an hour and a half from where I live,
sure.
On the Pennsylvania border. And they're relatively small mountains, especially compared to the Appalachian, the Appalachian Trail mountains.
Sure.
And I remember going up this little hill. It was probably 50 feet or something, and I was like, "Oh man, this is killing me." And I was like wondering if I was going to be physically able to do the trail.
We all have doubt, don't you think so? That doubt comes in quite often, quite early. You often think, "What on earth are you doing, you silly old fool?" Did you get that from time to time?
I did a lot, and even when I was in I remember hiking with. I don't know if you read where I was hiking with Lieutenant in Massachusetts, or I hiked with her in New Jersey and then later in Massachusetts.
Right. She's
a section hiker, and she would tell people, "This guy's going all the way to Katahdin and then Springer," and I'd be like, I don't know if I'm going to make it." And she'd be like, "Yes, you are."
And you did make it. So you got through the Whites, you got through the Presidentials, you got through May and so on. Was it tougher than the Alleghenies, or the Adirondacks rather, or was he just lying to you, Monk?
I think it was tougher. I think it scared me, actually.
Oh, really?
I see the 20-year-olds going through. I forget there's a section. I can't remember. Is it the Wildcats? Maybe that sometimes people go through it in 1 or 2 days.
Crazy. Yeah.
They try to do it in 1 day. I think it's a 21 mile section.
Yeah, I know.
And I did it in 2, and after I got done, I thought I should have done it in 3.
Yeah, it was tough.
It was tough, and it took longer than I expected. And then the light started fading. It was getting late, and the people I was hiking with, the couple I was hiking with were way behind me. They wanted to take breaks, and I was like, I don't know if there's enough time to be taking breaks. So I just pushed on ahead, and I was in this wilderness area that's the thing that's kind of scary. I was you're pretty far from anything. And if something happens, it's going to be tough to get you out of there. Mm-hmm. And there's some spots where it's like you're climbing vertically down rock face.
It's shocking almost, isn't it? Sometimes you think to yourself, I must have gone the wrong way. I did a few times. You're hanging on to this root above you, this root of a tree above you, and still the rock is another couple of feet below you. You think, how's this going to work? And there's a lot of sliding down your backside on that one.
I talked to my wife shortly after that, because I would call her whenever I was at a hostel or whenever I had service, and I called her, and she could hear in my voice that I was shaken by the experience. Sure. And she said, "Don't write about this in your journal. You'll scare people." She was mostly afraid, I think, of my daughter reading this,
Yeah, I understand that.
I mentioned it much later on after it was
After it was over, after it was done, yeah. And as listeners know, I've always been intrigued what it's like for a flip-flopper to summit Katahdin with no bows. Yeah, when we spoke before, you told me what a special day your Katahdin was. Tell us about that. Tell us about why it was special for you, because you still had quite a way to go.
I did, but the mountain itself is an amazing thing to climb. I saw it first early, probably about 30 miles away. I think you can see it. And then I camped at the guys I was with. We camped at Rainbow Lake Dam, and you can look across the lake and see this mountain, and it's beautiful, but it's very ominous because it's huge and it sticks up above the landscape.
Yeah, you can't miss it, can you?
My God, I'm going to climb that in a couple of days.
Yeah.
But the guys I was with, I met them. All the guys I hiked with, I met either in northern New Hampshire or Maine, and three or four of them, I think, were. I want to say three of them were Nobo hikers. They had started in Georgia, and they were all older guys, actually older than me. And then there was one guy who was in his 70s, who, by the way, I couldn't keep up with him, Red Man.
Impressive.
He led us up that mountain, and Porcupine, another flip-flopper, but she started further south in Virginia. I was with these wonderful people, and I enjoyed their company, and the weather was perfect. I was so lucky because the weather was absolutely beautiful. It was, I think it was like in the 90s.
Oh my gosh!
By the time I got to the top of Katahdin, it was in the 70s up there, so it was comfortable. But it was sunny, clear. You could see forever, and seeing that sign that I had been reading about in books and hearing about on YouTube videos and that, it was actually a somewhat emotional event for me, even though I knew I still had another 1,000 miles or so to go, 1,025, whatever it is.
Sure.
It was still a milestone that was really memorable, and being with people who had, just like the whole thing.
And was there emotion catching, because for them it was the end, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was. One of the guys I hiked with, Hamlet, he had the trail name because I think he acted on the side or for fun or whatever.
Right.
He memorized the Hamlet soliloquy.
To be or not to be, that is the question. Whether it is noble or all that sort. Yeah.
He rewrote it to be about hiking.
Oh, wow.
It was so cool. And then I filmed him standing behind the sign, giving this, repeating the verses. Only it was to hike or not to hike. And then,
cool.
He talked about that. It was so cool being with those people.
So you're halfway. And your second half, I believe you've got a Smokies story to share. I have no idea what it is, but I've written down I've got a Smokies story to share. So tell us about the Smokies then on the way down.
So I believe there was a windstorm or something that closed the road through Newfound Gap.
Sure, often does.
There was trees down.
Oh gosh.
And there was I'm trying to remember exactly what happened. I think there was a big snowstorm coming or something.
Right.
I'm forgetting the details. I should have read my journal, but I didn't read that part recently. But in any case, we found out that the shuttle driver who was picking us up and taking us to Gatlinburg, where we already had reservations at motels, and we couldn't go through Newfound Gap. We couldn't get a shuttle.
Right.
So we ended up going to, I think it was Peck's Shelter.
Yep.
And there's we met a section hiker, or a day hiker actually, who told us there was another trail that would get us down to Smoke's campground.
Right.
And it turned out, so we actually missed about 10 miles of trail because of that.
Right.
But the route we took was actually much more difficult.
I'm sure.
If we could have just kept going the way we were supposed to go, it would have been fine. But it was a long hike down, and some of it was rough walking, and a lot of times we didn't have any cell service. And
that's a bit of freestyling. There's a bit of freestyling. That's good. Yeah.
But it was the only way to get out. It was, we talked about it, the guys I was with. I was hiking with Jersey and Soundscape and Two Hats at the time. And those are the guys I started at Bear's Den with, by the way. And I finished with.
And you finished at Springer as well with them. Right. Yeah. So
I also hiked with Blueberry for a period of that time.
Right.
Too.
Yes. Well, there's quite a few people I've met as well. And it's funny, actually, I've never known anybody, maybe people do this a lot, but on your last night, you didn't sleep too far away from the top of Springer, did you? And why?
Well, we slept behind the shelter there on Springer Mountain, and you can see that picture behind me. My wife, I took a couple of thousand pictures.
Sure.
I know that your listeners can't see it, unfortunately, but
I thought I assumed it was an Appalachian Trail picture. Yeah.
There's a couple of those around here.
Right.
But she loved that picture, and then not knowing that what the picture was, It's actually my last morning on the trail.
Nice.
The sunrise coming up behind Springer Mountain Shelter.
But why stay there at Springer Mountain Shelter? Why didn't you finish the last third of a mile or whatever it is?
I don't know. I think we just wanted it to be special to get up in the morning and go up to that plaque.
Right. And it obviously was, because you got there, and then you walked down the approach trail, and I know that there was some of your family were there and some of their families were there, so you kind of had a bit of a gathering together, didn't you, at the bottom of the trail, which is kind of nice.
That was the emotional finish for me. Not so
I'm
much.
Sure.
I mean, Springer Mountain, it was nice to get there and realize it was done, and then the weird thing, of course, is after that, I suddenly had no white blazes to follow anymore. After following white blazes for 7 months, I was like, what do I do now? Yeah, you feel a little discombobulated, I guess.
You feel bereft. I felt bereft. I really did. It was, oh my gosh, what do I do now? Where do I go? Tell me which way to go.
Going down the approach trail, I think, is probably a lot more fun than going up the approach trail.
Definitely, no question. I'm sure you're right.
I got to that arch, and there was my family. So my wife and my 2 kids, they're grown kids, had flown down to Georgia and managed to stay in a hotel someplace. And then one of I think it was Jersey, and his wife had rented one of the cabins there at Amicaloa Falls.
Sure.
And we had a little party there, a little get together.
That's lovely.
It was
because a lot of us don't do that. A lot of us, when we finish Katahdin, and I've had this from lots of people, you all go your separate ways incredibly quickly. I know you've got your 4 or 5 hours to go down the mountain again, but once you get back to Baxter, you tend to go in different directions, and the goodbyes come too soon. You actually had to get together as a group of people, which I think was just a lovely way for you to finish. And
it was really nice.
Yeah, and one of the best finishes I've actually heard, actually. So what did you take away from this? Have you taken away a lesson you wanted to teach your grandchildren, or have you taken away other lessons?
Well, lessons I took away, I think I knew that, like my wife said when I started, she said, I know you'll finish because you don't quit anything, even when it makes sense to just quit.
That was a bit of a veiled insult, by the way.
Well, I added that second part. I don't think she said that, but
right.
Maybe she implied it. But
funny. Yeah.
But I know that I finish things when I start them, but sometimes I'm afraid to start things in the first place. And a lot of times I'm afraid to get out of my comfort zone. And I think I've always been like that with things.
Sure.
It's and in fact, sometimes it's my comfort zone that keeps me stuck where I am instead of quitting when I should.
You didn't want to come on the podcast, mate, and yet your wife got you at your comfort zone there as well. So think on, as they say. So are you one and done now? Then do you think this is something that you may try again, or are you going to try to just do a shorter hike? So what are you thinking?
Shorter hikes. I would never leave home for that long again or anything like that. I think having done it, I'm really glad I did it. It was the most amazing thing I've done in so many ways. It's a transformative experience in a lot of ways. And I didn't expect that. I didn't know it would be like that.
Sure.
But I don't need to be transformed anymore. I think leaving home for that long and that kind of a commitment, I don't need to do that again. But I do love going out in the woods, and you're right. A lot of the trail isn't through wilderness per se, but I did find it. I found it a moving experience to be walking on the trail a lot of times through the woods.
So did I. Yeah.
I may not have been far from civilization. Sometimes I could hear, especially in Pennsylvania, you can hear cows and trains the whole way through.
Great sound. I love hearing trains. I really do.
It was cool, but sleeping on the ground, sleeping in a tent, I loved it. It was an amazing experience to do that for so long. And
you also wrote, there are no easy days on the trail, just some that are less difficult than others. And you know what? That also sums up what the trail's about. You had an experience out there that a lot of us have shared. It's difficult for us to communicate to others sometimes what that experience is like. And I suspect a lot of your friends, when you say you've hiked the Appalachian Trail, they give you the same look that you gave Monk when he said he liked the Appalachian Trail. But, what's that? What's that all about? Yeah. Well, look, I appreciate you coming on the show, man. After all, I think it was. I think you had a wonderful experience. I love that finish when you all got together at the end, and I just thank you for sharing your experiences with us.
Thanks, Steve. It was nice talking to you.
Thank you, buddy. Take it easy. All right.
All right. Cheers.
Cheers then. Bye. I absolutely love that. Planning is important, but plans are useless. That's something you quickly learn while you're out there. I may not have been the best planner, possibly even the worst, but I was able to adjust on the fly. You really need that ability in your makeup because the trail will throw stuff at you that you just didn't expect. Changing your plans and being prepared to make that change will serve you really well out there. And by the way, Dennis's Trail Journal is well worth a read. So I've added a link to it and a link to more information about Lewy body dementia in the show notes. This year's class of 2022 has not panned out as well as I'd hoped. We've had people who didn't start, people who got off fairly soon, and people who, for one reason or another, are currently off trail. In many ways, it speaks to the difficulty of doing this. I asked a random group of dreamers to join this group, and I knew that we'd get a variety of stories. However positive they all were, I kind of knew, and I'm sure some of them knew, that they wouldn't make it to the end. That's turned out to be the case. This week, one is off and one is on. Let's find out which, with Sarah Landis or Sunny.
Hello.
Hey Sarah, how are you?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
I had a few technical difficulties trying to make this work, but I'm not too bad. Where actually are you now?
I am just past Harper's Ferry. I'm sitting at the Washington Monument right now.
No, oh, what a beautiful spot! I remember that very well. Yeah,
yeah,
lovely. So, we've already started, so I'm recording now anyway.
Okay.
Just to let listeners know, I saw Facebook this week, and because Sarah and I are friends on Facebook, I suddenly saw she was at a wedding in California. So what happened?
So I had actually planned it from the beginning. My best friend was getting married and I was a maid of honor. So
nice.
I planned, to just get off trail for a couple days and go to the wedding in California.
That's quite a commitment, especially, I mean, obviously she's your friend and of course you would do that, but to actually get off the trail, what was it like firstly to get off the trail, and then we'll come back to a minute, what sort of time you had, but how was it when it came to it? I know you knew you were going to do it. Were you kind of reluctant to leave your family behind?
I really was. And it's funny because, I knew from the beginning that I would have to do it.
Sure.
And when I first met everyone, it was always like, oh yeah, like if we're still together at that point, or like
sure.
if we still are hiking, whatever. And then it got to the point like we were all still hiking together, and it was really sad to have to like go away from them. But we had a pretty long talk actually, and I actually decided to skip the miles that they did while I was gone, and I left just before the Shenandoahs ended, and then they hiked for 5 days, and I rejoined them in Harper's Ferry. So I skipped a little bit of the portion of the trail, but I'm planning on going back just because it's so close to where I live in Maryland. So it's like not going to be that hard to go back there.
Nice. So the band's back together, is it?
Yeah. Yeah. And like, I just realized, like, I mean, I'm sure I'd be able to make new friends and everything, but none of us wanted to part. So I just decided to just go to Harper's Ferry to catch up with them.
That worked out then. So the reunion must be great. So tell us what it was like to actually get off the trail and shower properly and wear proper clothes and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely nice. I ate a lot and I would actually get full. It was I was definitely pretty restless just because I wasn't as active as normal. But I tell you what, yesterday, my first day back hiking, I felt so good. Like it was like I felt like a day hiker. Like I wasn't sore. I didn't have like painful knees. It felt really good.
Actually, you probably smelled like a day hiker as well, didn't you?
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Because you can always tell day hikers as you walk past them, they smell nice,
Yeah.
don't they? They smell perfume and
Yeah.
things
Yeah.
like
It
that.
was funny too. I didn't want to like shower when I was off trail because I was like, I haven't done anything. Like I don't need to shower. So it was hard like getting into that routine.
But was it? I mean, and the thing is, I suppose if you're maid of honor, you're quite. You're not smart. You're obviously not the centre of attention. The bride's the centre of attention. Did you find people were interested in what you were doing, or were they just you were just there as a maid of honor?
Well, it was a pretty small wedding, and I knew a lot of people there. It was my best friend's wedding. We have a lot of mutual friends, so I got to talk to a lot of people about what I was doing, and some people, knew more about it, and some people like had those questions like, "Where do you sleep?
Yeah.
What do you eat?"
Yeah.
And there's actually another a family member of the groom was a PCT hiker, so her and I actually had a lot to talk about.
Nice, very nice too. But then you flew back.
I did.
And by the way, how did you get off? You got off at I'm trying to think where you would get off then. If you got off just before the Shenandoahs, where's your nearest airport to there? Where's your nearest airport?
I just flew out of Washington D.C.
Right.
and like the Shenandoahs and Harper's Ferry, it's all like an hour and a half drive from my hometown.
Right,
so
perfect.
Luckily, my family was more than willing to help out and take me to the airport and take me back to trail.
Right. So have you made any changes? And did you buy any other stuff, or did you just get straight back into it in the same way?
I didn't get anything new this time, but right before I left in our last resupply, I've made a couple changes. I just got a new sleeping pad. I got some new shoes, but nothing crazy.
Do you know what though? I mentioned this to somebody the other day. It's kind of nice to get new stuff every now and then, only because the rest of it gets so funky, doesn't it? Just to try on something. I mentioned this a couple of times recently that at Monson, I just bought two new pairs of socks, even though there was absolutely nothing wrong with the ones I had. I just wanted new socks for the 100-mile wilderness, and it kind of buoyed me quite a bit, and I really enjoyed that. So what have we missed? I think we haven't spoken for 2 or 3 weeks. So what was the last, what's been going on?
Yeah. So it's actually funny. I was thinking about it. Last time we talked, it was right before I saw Dragon's Tooth and McAfee Knob.
Yeah.
And I was having an amazing couple days, and shortly after we talked, like maybe like 2 days later, I started going through like my first really bad phase on trail. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I was just telling Mighty Blue how amazing everything was. Like, was I lying? But I went through a really bad, like week-long phase of just, I got kind of sick, and I was feeling like nauseous every day. I was tired. I was exhausted, and I just got really down. And I would wake up and, we would plan 20-mile days, and I just like, I don't want to hike today. And it got to the point where I was like, I might need to like drop back from my tramline, or I might need to like take a couple of zeros.
Sure.
I was exhausted. I couldn't stay motivated to walk. And
what was that about then? Firstly, what was that about? And then how did your family react to that then? Your family, rather.
Well, I think looking back, I was just starting to get sick, and I ended up like having like pretty bad like diarrhea and vomiting on trail, which is awful.
Super.
And it was terrible. And just I think just like the couple days leading up to like actually getting sick, and then like 2 days of being sick while not slowing down and like hiking 17 to 23 miles every day. It was just like looking back, like that's absolutely what it was. But at the time, I didn't really know what was going on. And I thought I was just, just the constant everyday walking big miles was just getting me down.
Yes.
And I told the people I was hiking with that I was feeling this way. And they were just, they felt for me, and they were just like, obviously, like, we want you to like do what's going to be best for you. And if you need to slow down and you need to break away from us, like, we would be sad, but we would support you. And, and luckily I just ended up feeling better. I just ended up getting past it.
Was it neuro, do you think?
I don't know. It might have been.
Because
Everyone else
you
in my
hike
family got it.
Oh, they did get it, do they?
Yeah.
Oh, there we are. Almost certainly is, isn't it? Really. So that's I never. Luckily, I never got it, but that's part of the joys of being the tramley. So, how many strong is your tramley now? I think it was 4 before, wasn't it? Was it 4 of you before?
It was 6 of us.
Oh, right.
And then one of the people was actually just a lasher, and they were planning on getting off in Harper's Ferry. So he just left yesterday.
Right.
Did
he start from the beginning? Did he start from the beginning?
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. I'm surprised he wasn't tempted to stay on, or he just had to go back to work.
I know. Yeah. He like has a job and everything. So he just wanted to do like half the trail.
Oh dear. I bet he was sad to go.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're happy to be back on. And you're feeling strong. Did you, that first day yesterday, did you hike pretty well?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. It was so fun to hike after taking 6 zeros. Like, I felt so rejuvenated. It was wonderful.
That is so cool. I tell you, I think you're one of the more successful ones of our class of 2022 right now. So we're holding a lot of hope in you. That's why I was a bit disappointed when I saw you in California, but I'm glad that was just a temporary blip. So carry on, keep going, and just check in every now and then. Let us know how you're doing. Okay.
Absolutely.
All right, Sarah. Take it easy.
All right.
Cheers.
Thank you. Bye.
So, by a process of elimination, our other guest today has ended her hike. Sarah's been a constant joy to talk with. She always seems to be up and having a blast. Let's face it, that's the real reason for doing this, isn't it? You should be enjoying it, however tough it is. So let's speak now to Brittaney, part of our original threesome of Brittaney, Ryan and Kira. Here she is. Hey, Brittaney, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Well, I'm okay. Checking in on you, obviously, because I know you're home now. So what happened?
I think that I maybe wasn't mentally prepared to hike without Ryan.
How did that decision come about, though? Because, we did talk about it before you went. What happens if one of you wants to go home? And the others, you obviously, when Ryan went home, you obviously decided to carry on. What was that, how did that feel at the time?
Well, the first time that he had gotten off, I had still that thought in the back of my head that he was still able to get back on.
Sure.
And so I think it made it a little bit easier to not be there with him.
Right.
And the next time we went back, he had kind of said, this might be my last try. And so when he got off, and because probably because I already knew how it felt to be on trail without him before he got off the next time, it probably messed with me a little bit more, because I had thought to myself, I have to go all this way without him, and it's going to be a long, long way.
It sure is. It sure is.
And part of me, it was like, we wanted to do this together. It was kind of something we had planned together to do.
Sure.
And I just couldn't imagine doing it by myself, I guess, all the way to Katahdin.
Yeah. So he went home, and you had that period. Was it about a week walking with Kira?
Yes.
And was that fun?
Yes, I love Kara. I mean, she has an amazing personality. She's super funny, and she's very supportive of me, and I try to be supportive of her. It just, during the days I would be fine because I'd be hiking all day. My mind was distracted by hiking.
Sure.
And then once I got to camp and I was sitting there without Ryan, just kind of setting up my tent by myself and thinking, oh, I have to sleep by myself in the tent tonight. And, sometimes I wouldn't have service to even talk to Ryan. And I'd be like, man, I just it's, I don't know, maybe it's a little bit silly, but I think that it's just something that we wanted to do with each other. And it was really hard for me to go on by myself, I think.
I must admit, when I spoke to Ryan last week, I was kind of not concerned, but I wondered whether you would have issues going forward. And I thought to myself, she's either going to tough it out, and frankly, tough it out isn't fair, but she's either going to work her way through it or she's going to go home relatively quickly. And you obviously went home relatively quickly. Now you've made the decision to go home. Do you feel this was the right decision for you?
I do. I think that next year we're going to try again. And
okay.
So I have a better idea of what to expect. And I can mentally prepare myself a little bit better. And, it's just it's a lesson, everything's a lesson
Absolutely,
out there.
yeah.
And it was definitely a lesson for me that, I should expect things that I don't want to happen, and I think I kind of struggled with that a little bit, especially with planning and things like that. Like I really struggled with, like, I would make a plan for the week, or we'd plan to go stay somewhere and we wouldn't make it there in time, or like things like that. It's just like that stuff kind of like triggered me, I guess. And I'd be like upset about the things not going the way that I had planned them to go. And I think a lot of it happened that way. I mean, Kara got off trail for 2 weeks, and then I had to come off 2 weeks because I didn't want to do it by myself. And then before that, Ryan had to come off, and I was on for like 3 weeks without him. I mean, it was just like, I don't know, it was like back to back to back things were happening. And I felt like, I got to the point where maybe I wasn't enjoying myself as much as I should have.
But you know what?
I didn't want to be out there.
Well, you know what? That's the best reason for coming home. You didn't want to be out there anymore. And that's absolutely great. And I think you made that decision. You got to be strong to make that decision, because I know it's something you obviously wanted to do very much, but you wanted to do it with Ryan. I'm sure it's given you lessons. So what happened isn't something you were expecting, but you kind of knew beforehand that you have to adapt to things as they go. And do you feel you're now better capable, having tried it you've walked about 500 miles, haven't you? Probably more, actually.
I actually only did a little bit over 200 because we went to Fontana Dam and then skipped to Damascus.
Oh, of course, that's right.
So
yeah.
We only did about 200.
But, 200 miles ain't nothing either, by the way, just so you know. And it gives you the feeling of what it's like to be in the woods in that period of time. But you guys never had the opportunity as a threesome to be hiking consistently for a long period of time. And I never thought that you got into a rhythm on your hike because of that. Someone was always going off or having to come back and so on. So I think that's the thing. And also you tend to learn stuff when you're out there. And one thing you learn pretty quickly is all those plans you make. You can make as many plans as you like, but they don't always work out. Don't make plans. That could be the other way forward. So when you decided to leave, was that a situation you just woke up one morning having thought about it the previous night, or were you discussing it with Kira as you're going along?
You know what? I had, when I left to go to the trail after Ryan got off the second time.
Yeah.
I'd struggled with going by myself from that point.
Right.
And I told myself, I'm going to give myself a week. I'm going to get on at Damascus, or I don't remember where we were at the time. And I'm going to try to make it to Bland without, getting off. But
sure.
For the first 2 days, I struggled really hard. And at one point I had called Ryan, like crying hysterically, and he couldn't understand what I was saying. And I don't know. I just felt off without him. And I definitely had thought about it for a few days, and it was not an easy decision. Like, let me tell you, it was not an easy decision. Of
course.
I was crying in part because I missed him, but also crying because I had put in so much work already,
Yeah.
And so it was not an easy decision to make, but I went to bed the night that I cried hysterically, and the next day I hiked. And then after that night, after I cried that night and went to the next campsite and slept that night, or I told Kara that day, and I said, hey, I just want to let you know, when I came out here, I told myself that I was going to give myself a week, and I'm not doing well. So I'm probably going to get off tomorrow and go home.
And how was she?
And I could tell that she was upset. I mean, she had, I don't know if she was upset because she maybe didn't imagine her doing it herself either. And so she maybe thought that, I don't know, she wanted me to be there because we had done the whole thing together.
Sure.
And I think we both kind of shed some tears that night. And, and I told her, I said, I don't want you to get off. If, you're having a good time, definitely stay on. And that's what she did. And she called a few family members, and they were like, do not get off the trail. Do not get off the trail. They were very supportive of her. And I'm very proud of her. I told her when I left, I said, listen, I'm so proud of you for doing this by yourself. You are so strong, and it's so impressive that you're doing this. So,
well, it's come kind of full circle, because she was the one who originally reached out to me to follow you two on the trail. And she then joined, not the last minute, but she then decided she was going to go, and she's still out there now. Is she, as far as you know, and I can't record her for this week's show, but I'm going to record her for next week's show. Is she feeling good right now? Do you know?
I think she is. She's talked to Ryan's mom a few times, and she says she's doing very well. I gave her my Garmin to take with her so that she could be safe, and I've been watching her on the Garmin. And she's making progress, and I think she should be hitting Bland today or tomorrow.
Right.
So I think she's doing very well.
Okay.
She's such a strong woman. I don't have any concerns with her getting off. I know that she's been through a lot in her regular life, but I know that she mentally is so strong, like way stronger than anybody that I've met. So
okay, cool. Well, look, I'm glad you come to tell me about it. It's so interesting to me, and I think hopefully you'll look back at this experience and in retrospect, and you'll learn from it yourself, and it'll make you stronger next year when you decide you're going to do it, because this ain't for everybody. And if the idea for you was to hike it with Ryan, then that part of it had gone away. So I can entirely understand why you did it. But I appreciate you coming back on, and just let me know if you guys go again next year, and we'll have a chat then.
Absolutely.
Okay, Brittaney.
Thank you so much.
No worries. Thanks for being on. Say hi to Ryan for me.
I will. Thanks.
Cheers then. Bye.
Bye.
I've got to say, that wasn't the biggest surprise to me. Ryan had already alluded to the fact that she may have a difficult time without him, and I totally get it. If you've planned to hike with a person you love, then going by yourself is an entirely different and much more difficult animal. I'm sure the two of them will have gained so much from this year and will be even better prepared when they come back again next year. Sakira's now moving on as a solo hiker. I'm looking forward to catching up with her next week to learn her impressions of this different hike. Now, thanks to our wonderful donors. In the past 2 weeks, we've had monthly donors step up once more. They are Emmanuel Bravo Ramos, Alan Troy, Jessica Diaz, Hugh Eckreth, Michelle Brown, Justin Mullins, Kevin Eastman, Ann Dobson, Mike Gicello and Terry Hackler. While we've had some terrific one-off donations this past 2 weeks from Kevin Weidman, Christian Bear, hope I pronounced that correctly, Christian, Clifford Bates, Arthur Gross and John Park. We couldn't do this without you, so thanks to all of you. And if you find value in what we do and would like to unleash a few bucks in my direction, please go to the hikingradionetwork.com website and click on one of the many donation buttons you'll see there. Cheers. Finally today, Jill Stefanos is approaching the Smokies, always a Southern Appalachian Trail highlight. I'll see you next week. Sunday the 15th of May, 1983. Mile 158.8. Sleeping was difficult last night. It remained quite warm and I sweated considerably, even though I left my sleeping bag unzipped. I woke this morning at 6 a.m. before dawn broke over the forest and was on the trail at 7:20. Dave and I spent the morning giggling about a nauseating shelter companion and expressing our relief that he was heading south while we were northward bound. A steep climb from the shelter brought us to the summit of Chihuahua Board, which was surrounded by a sprawling open meadow. The entire mountain was wreathed in dark clouds, so we missed out on some promising views, but I did enjoy the experience of meeting a large group of nice people who were camped in tents near the top. They were volunteer workers from a local Appalachian Trail Club who were clearing the trail of brush and blowdowns, spending their weekend performing a great deal of hard work for no pay in order to make the trail more enjoyable for hikers like me. That is the manner in which most of the 2,000 plus miles of the Appalachian Trail are maintained. The AT could not exist were it not for the efforts of people like this. The sun emerged on the ensuing descent, which was steep and muddy, making it tough to concurrently move fast and stay on my feet. When that was over, the AT traversed a group of very rugged knobs before descending to a road crossing at Stokoa Gap, where I caught up to Dave. We relaxed for a while in a roadside field. The grueling 6.3 miles I had just walked had chewed up almost 3.5 hours. The stretch of AT between Wessa and Fontana Village is reputed to be one of the most difficult sections of the entire trail, and it lived up to every bit of its reputation today. We did not linger long in Stokoa Gap. The sun had disappeared again, and a cold steel wind began lashing stinging splinters of mist across the meadow. The weather turned schizophrenic. The warmest night of this adventure had been followed by the coldest and most blustery day. We quickly became chilled and were forced to move on in order to warm up. An icy grey rain began to fall as we left that field. The top inch or so of clay beneath our feet turned into something resembling Vaseline. The trail we were hiking appeared to have been laid out by a psycho. It soared straight up for what seemed an eternity. Then, almost immediately, it lunged down a sharp, neck-breaking declivity, along which we gave back all of the altitude we had just struggled so hard to gain. At the bottom, we crossed Sweetwater Gap, a razor-thin strip of level ground, and began the worst ascent of the entire day. For the next half mile, the Appalachian Trail climbed a nightmare grade up a smooth slope, lacking in bumps or rocks to utilise as handholds or footholds. I had to strain upward on tiptoes with my weight as far forward as possible. It was like an enormous demented treadmill designed for building huge thighs and calves. At the end of that terrible climb, I turned to Dave and asked, "How would you do if some guy walked up to us right now and said, 'Hey, how do you fellows like the trail I laid out?'" Dave was all for shooting his kneecaps off and then forcing him to carry our backpacks up that hill. Dave is a sick man. I merely wanted to squeeze the guy's neck until his veins popped out, his face turned purple, and his tongue swelled to the size of a grapefruit. You don't have to be psychotic to hike the AT, but sometimes it helps. For guys like Dave and me, anyway. There was one last similar climb along the remainder of today's hike. To employ a phrase I once read, the air turned blue with profanity all around us as we covered it. But it would be pointless to write down all of our remarks on that ascent. They might also be used against us someday in a court of law. It was still fairly early in the afternoon when we stumbled into Cable Gap Shelter after 14.7 miles. But we decided to stop for the night. Cold rain and killer climbs had quelled our enthusiasm for any additional miles today. Here at Cable Gap, Dave and I have caught up to, with the exception of Russ, the only through hikers that we had met thus far on the AT. They are known in the registers as Ron and Sonny the Wonder Dog. Ron is a dark-haired, heavily bearded man who looks to be in his 30s. Sonny is a large, black, mixed breed resembling a Doberman whose ears and tail have not been trimmed. They are presently travelling with another dog, a little white mongrel stray who followed them out of Wesser. Ron broke out some good salami, and Dave turned us on to several joints of good pot. We all got very high and giggly. When through hikers get together, we love to share stories, and God knows we all have some good ones. We've been spinning tales all night as the rain patters down off the shelter's tin roof. Ron said that he shocked his entire family when he told them he was going to hike the Appalachian Trail. Previously, he had always been one of those people who jump into their car to travel 1 block to the store. He had never backpacked in his life before this trip. He had us rolling on the floor with anecdotes about his early misadventures with all the unfamiliar new equipment he had bought for this hike. Having thrown away all of their instructions unread, he found himself on the trail, unable to pitch his tent or to run his stove. Fortunately, he had started the AT in the middle of April, at a time when a lot of other prospective thru-hikers were heading out. There was always somebody around to help him, and he gradually learned everything he needed to know as he went along. Ron has a great attitude and seems to be enjoying himself immensely. Out to have a good time, he has set no goals for himself concerning how far he intends to go on this trip or how fast. Sonny is also a character. A large, mean-looking dog with an authoritative bark, he is, as Ron fondly informs us, an incredible coward who tends to cringe between his master's legs on those frequent occasions when something frightens him. Ron had a number of funny stories concerning the many near-tragic experiences when Sonny attempted to perform this manoeuvre while Ron was hiking. Needless to say, Ron has his hands full with Sonny. He is hoping to find someone to take that little stray off his hands in Fontana Village. It's time for me to end this. I want to go rejoin the fun, and I'm too stoned to write anyway. Another trail town waits tomorrow. Monday, 16th of May, 1983, 7:10 a.m. When you spend the night beneath a tin roof, unless you're stone deaf, you know that it rained. It poured last night. A John Bonham drum solo is a lullaby compared to the savage rhythms which serenaded our sleep. The music had a certain wild, primal energy, which I rather enjoyed, but hey, I've personally been to 17 Blue Oyster Cult concerts. The onslaught continues unabated this morning. None of us are going anywhere just now. Beyond these walls lies nothing but misery. As havens go, Cable Gap Shelter is something of an armpit. Rather than the usual wooden floor, it is a dirt one, which is mud today. The sleeping arrangements are 4 ancient wire bunks in various stages of collapse attached to one of the side walls. There were numerous small leaks in the roof and one major gusher. Dave discovered it last night when it caressed him awake with a soothing faceful of ice water. Despite all of the rain, the stream which runs alongside the shelter is a thin, dirty trickle, in which I needed 2 minutes to fill my canteen by scooping water into it with my coffee cup. It tasted rather foul, but I did not begrudge the effort. I learned my lesson about being finicky towards water back in Georgia. My lips are still black-edged and shredded. Our enforced captivity has led to another round of stories. Ron mentioned to us this morning that he was supposed to be accompanied on this hike by a friend. They had planned this adventure while both were going through divorces, but the other fellow reconciled with his wife just before they were to leave. Ron tells us that she was just a little ticked off when he asked her husband, "Does this mean you're not going with me?" On a more serious note, Ron said that back in mid-April when he started on the AT, he shared a shelter with 14 other people, all prospective thru-hikers. They were packed inside like sardines, and many were forced to pitch their tents outside. That makes me happy I started when I did, after the early crush. Ron now sees only 4 or 5 of their names still in the registers, a grim example of the dropout rate in Georgia. The rain is tapering off. Perhaps we'll make it to Fontana Village today, after all. Afternoon, mile 165.9, Fontana Dam. The rain continued to slacken, finally tapering off by mid-morning. We had a late start to Fontana, but it was only a 7-mile hike. The sun began to break out as we climbed the Yellow Creek Range. The trail was not overly difficult, and the afternoon turned out to be a pleasant one. At one point along the ridge crest, I got a great picture of Fontana Dam and the huge lake it has formed, with the Great Smokies rising like blue-grey giants as a backdrop. Their summits were wreathed in clouds, but what else is new? That is how the mountain range got its name. Everywhere else I looked, the sun was brightly shining, an omen whose significance escaped me completely. See the next chapter. A long descent brought us to North Carolina 28, the small 2-lane highway connecting Fontana Dam with the village. We dropped our gear off at the Fontana Dam shelter and are about to go into the village. More later. 7:15 p.m. I'm sitting in the Fontana Dam shelter, known to backpackers as the Fontana Hilton. Constructed by the Tennessee Valley Authority, a federal agency which administers the nearby dam on the Little Tennessee River, on their grounds here for the use of long-distance hikers entering and exiting from the Great Smoky Mountains, it only superficially resembles the rustic 3-sided shelters provided for us along the rest of the Appalachian Trail. This place is a palace. It has beautifully finished hardwood floors, hardwood walls, hardwood ceilings, and hardwood sleeping platforms, of which any homeowner would be proud. It is big enough to sleep 20, and Dave, Ron, Sonny and I have it all to ourselves so far tonight. I have just returned from Fontana Village, an expensive mountain resort community that originally was the housing for the construction workers when the dam was being built. It was 3 miles each way by road from the shelter, and I had to walk them all. Expensive resort communities make lousy areas in which to hitchhike. Yuppies don't like to have white trash backpacker scum in their shiny new BMWs and Mercedes. In Fontana, my first stop was to pick up my supply package from home at the post office. It contained food and a clean towel, along with the Tennessee-North Carolina guidebook, all of which I placed into my backpack. I put my old towel, the Georgia-North Carolina guidebook, and the first 3 chapters of my journal back into the box, sealed it, and mailed it back home. I went next door to the grocery store and bought Pop-Tarts, crackers, 2 boxes of Lipton soup, a small jar of Tang, a small box of tea bags, and a copper pot and pan scrubber, which hopefully will not rust like the steel wool pad which I had been using. Finally, I went next door to the laundromat and washed all my clothes. Everything in Fontana Village was too damn expensive. The place is a resort trap for the rich. If I ever thru-hike again, I will use Wesser as a supply point. The Nantahala Outdoor Centre in that town receives and holds packages for Appalachian Trail hikers. The little mongrel following Ron and Sonny stayed in Fontana Village. I hope he finds a home with somebody. I'm told that there are abandoned dogs in these mountains who work a stretch of trail between 2 towns, latching onto and mooching off of the hikers as they pass between the towns, and then catching someone going the other way. Another sad story of life along the Appalachian Trail. Back to the Fontana Hilton. There are real flush toilets in a restroom about 100 yards down the road from this place, and free public showers a 1/4 mile down the road at the dam. Both are very welcome. I've been on the trail for almost 2 weeks now, and I've only seen toilets 3 times and showers twice. There have not even been outhouses at the shelters this far south. Had I not stayed at the Wallace Inn on the trail in Georgia, nor hitched into Franklin, North Carolina, where I lodged at Henry's Motel, things would have been even more grim in that respect. Dave and I happened to run into a National Park Service ranger in Fontana Village. She gave us the necessary through-hike permits, which allow us to use the shelters and campsites in the Great Smokies, so we are all set to enter the park tomorrow. We have 8 days and 7 nights in which to pass through. Ron and Sonny are getting a ride around the Smokies where no dogs are allowed, but we will probably run into them again in Hot Springs, North Carolina. That will be the first town heading northward along the Appalachian Trail, which is not located in a dry county, so just about every thru-hiker spends at least one night there. An indispensable tool for thru-hikers is a 10-volume guidebook set sold by the Appalachian Trail Conference. Fontana Dam marks the spot where Volume 2 takes over. After all of the troubles and tribulations of Georgia and parts of North Carolina for northbound thru-hikers, the feat of having walked your way through your first guidebook can be a momentous occasion, for some more than others. Ron tells us that he met a man in Fontana Village today who was strutting around with the Tennessee-North Carolina guidebook, which covers the Appalachian Trail between Fontana Dam and the Virginia state line, in his hand, loudly proclaiming, "The Red Book! The Red Book! We are in the Red Book! Throw away the Blue Book! We are in the Red Book!" I interrupted Ron's story to mention that the cover of the Tennessee-North Carolina guidebook was purple. He didn't care, Ron told me. To him, it was the Red Book. I think I know exactly how that guy felt.